My name is Martin Ulbrich. I'm an economist by training, and I've been working with the European Commission for 25 years. Nowadays, I work in the Department for Digital Affairs, where I have been part of the team that has drafted the proposal for an AI regulation, which the Commission has adopted in April 2021. Today, I'm going to present that proposal to you by asking three questions. First of all, why do we need an AI regulation? Secondly, what kind of AI does this regulation actually regulate? And thirdly, how does it regulate the AI which is covered by the regulation? Why do we need an AI regulation at all? That's a good question, isn't it? After all, AI is a new technology which has huge potential. It can improve our economy, it can improve our societal well-being, and has lots of potential applications which can make life better for all of us. That is true, and that is why the European Commission is generally very much in favor of AI and supports AI investment, for example. However, AI also has certain risks which are associated with its use. And these are mostly due to the fact that AI is very complicated, especially if you use technologies like machine learning. The reasoning which the AI system applies, or the mechanism by which it arrives at a decision or an output, is not always, actually very often, not understandable to the human programmers. As a result, it becomes very transparent. This is combined with the fact that AI systems are getting bigger and bigger. The latest AI models, general purpose models, have something like 175 billion parameters. Clearly, that's very, very complicated and very difficult for humans to interpret. So you might come into a situation where, for example, you go to a bank, you ask for a credit, and the bank says, sorry, we can't give you the credit. And when you ask why, they will say, sorry, we don't know. The system told us so. And nobody would actually be able to tell you. That is a problem, and that is something we need to address. However, please take note that the AI Act does not actually create new rights. There's already lots of legislation which is applicable to AI, just like any other technology. There's a General Data Protection Regulation, the Unfair Commercial Practices Act, the Non-Discrimination Directives. All of this is in terms of fundamental rights, and in terms of safety, there are, of course, the specific sectoral legislations for cars, for planes, etc. There's a machine regulation, there's a general product safety regulation. So there are plenty of regulations and other legislations which are already applicable to AI. The AI regulation does not actually regulate all of AI. On the contrary, it divides AI applications into 4 different categories and really regulates only 2 of them and a third a bit. Let's start with the most restrictive regulation, which is for a category of AI which is totally forbidden. There are very few of them, 3.5 cases, but they're considered so negative for society that they should not take place at all. And I'll explain them in a second. Secondly, you've got the category of high-risk AI, which are AI applications which are positive in general. They can be positive. However, they can have a very large impact on citizens or also on companies which are affected by them, and therefore they have to fulfill certain quality criteria. That is a small part of the market. We have estimated in our impact assessment that this should be somewhere between 5 and 15% of the market. So it's somewhere between 1 in 20 and 1 maybe in 6 or 7 of AI applications. And that's the only one which is really regulated. Then we have a bigger category, which is AI which needs specific transparency requirements, which are really very, very small requirements. It's a bigger number of applications, but a much smaller requirement. And then we have the largest category of applications, which are AI applications which are not subject to any regulation whatsoever. So they're not actually concerned by the AI regulation at all. Now, what are the unacceptable risks which are forbidden? First of all, there's the general purpose social scoring. So if you have a system like exists in certain other countries where you get a number of points for your general social behavior, let's say 100 points, and then they take away 5 points from you if you cross a traffic light when it's red, and then if you get less than 50 points on your balance, then you're not allowed to take a train anymore. That is something which we don't want to see in Europe. Similarly, we do not want to see any AI applications which use subliminal techniques to manipulate people. And also, we don't want to see any AI applications which are exploiting the vulnerabilities of specifically vulnerable groups, such as children, handicapped people, very old people. So these are the 3 which are totally forbidden. There's one other which is not totally forbidden, but very much restricted, which is the biometric identification, i.e. face recognition. It's not called face recognition because other technologies will follow which can do the same thing. For example, you have things like gait recognition where you can recognize people by the way they walk, which is generally forbidden. It is already forbidden for private companies of private operators under the General Data Protection Regulation because it's not really forbidden, but it is actually in practice forbidden because you would need to get the approval of everybody you film. And of course, that's pretty much impossible if you do it on a large scale and if you do it on a large, for example, public square. So this one, the one in the regulation only concerns law enforcement basically. And so it's generally not allowed. There are, however, exceptional circumstances under which it may be allowed, such as if you have an imminent threat of a terrorist activity, so you have some concrete evidence that something may be about to happen, or for example, also if you're looking for abducted children, then you may use this technology. But apart from that, in general, it's not allowed. So these are the three uh, categories or the three applications which are falling under the unacceptable risk and which are therefore forbidden in Europe, according to the proposal. Secondly, you've got the high risk applications. So these applications are generally positive. However, you need to have certain quality criteria which you need to fulfill. And basically, there are two groups. One of them are machines which are dangerous, and they're so dangerous that even today, before any AI, you cannot just sell them, but they need to be approved first. Things like motor saws, cars, planes, things which can kill or maim you. Nowadays, before you sell them, they need to get approved first by a third party. And if you have an AI system which you use for a security relevant part of them, then you need to get that AI system also to be approved. So, for example, if you have got a car and you use AI to improve the braking, that needs to be approved. If you have a car and you use AI to improve the sound system, that does not need to be approved because it's not safety relevant. So that's the one part. That's the kind of machine part, which is dangerous to safety. And then we've got the second part, which are applications which are more relevant to fundamental rights. And here we have things like access to education, so access to universities, for example, or to schools. In the terms of employment, we have things like recruitment, termination of contract, evaluation, also access to essential social services, and many applications in the field of law enforcement. And in all of these cases, the reasoning is similar, that these decisions taken by these algorithms can have a very important impact on your life, and therefore it's important that these applications are based on very high quality software. So that's the second part. The third part is AI with specific transparency requirements, which is really which is a much bigger part of the market. However, which has really only very limited um, transparency requirements. For example, if you have deep fakes, you need to label them. So if you have a camera which seems to be showing the president saying something, but it's not actually, then you just need to label it, put 3 words on the screen. This is a deep fake. Actually, it's 4 words. Similarly, if you are interfacing with an AI algorithm where it's not obvious, so for example, if you call the help desk of a company and you're talking to a human voice and that's an AI algorithm, that needs to be labeled uh, because it's not obvious. I mean, if it's not obvious, clearly. Um, if you talk to your car, you clearly don't need to label that because it's clearly obvious from the circumstances that this is not human, but it's an AI. Once again, this is very limited. It basically only says that you have to label it. At the beginning of the call, it has to say this is an AI you're talking about, and that's it. So extremely minimal requirements. And then the fourth category, which is minimal or no risk, that you actually don't have any requirements at all. Companies producing these applications are invited to use codes of conduct if they want to, but there's no obligation to do so. So there are 4 categories of AI applications. For the first one, there are no obligations because they're forbidden. For the third one, I have explained the obligations, which are minimal transparency obligations. And for the fourth category, there are no obligations because they are not considered in any way risky. So let's look at the high risk applications and what kind of obligations they have. So the first thing to do if you want to know whether you have to follow any obligation is to look in the regulation in Annex 3. There's a complete list, an exhaustive list of the applications which are considered high risk. So if you have one of these applications, if you're developing one of these applications, then you need to fulfill the criteria and the obligations which are set out in the regulation. So what are these obligations? First of all, you need to ensure robustness, accuracy, and cybersecurity. Now that seems to be something which most companies are doing anyway, because if your system isn't robust and breaks down after 3 weeks, or if it isn't accurate and gives wrong predictions, or if it's open to cybersecurity attacks, it will not actually have much success of the market. Similarly, the next set of obligation, which is to use high quality training, validation, and testing data, is something which most companies will need to do anyway, because if the training data isn't high quality, i.e., it's not relevant, it's not representative, then they will have lots of problems with the accuracy. Companies will also have to establish documentations and design logging features in order to improve traceability and auditability. They have to ensure appropriate degree of transparency and to provide users with information to see what exactly the system can and cannot do. And they have to ensure human oversight where it's appropriate. So as you can see, these 5 sets of obligations are actually very limited. They correspond to what most companies are doing anyway. It is nevertheless even so important to have them as a legislative requirement so that it applies to all companies and not just to most companies, because the effects on the fundamental rights of the affected citizens can be very severe. And if you happen to be affected by a company which is not following these requirements, it's not good enough to say, yeah, sorry, 99% of the companies are doing it. You just had bad luck. We need a legal requirement to ensure that they're actually being respected by all of them. And that is exactly what the AI Act is doing and what the regulation is proposing. If you want to retain 3 key elements from my presentation, I would suggest the following. First, the AI Act does not create new rights for citizens or businesses. The purpose of the AI Act is to make sure existing legislation continues to be applicable in the context of technological innovation and, in particular, artificial intelligence. Second, the AI Act uses a risk-based approach, which means that the overwhelming majority of obligations only apply to high-risk AI applications. Third, most of the obligations which are imposed on high-risk AI applications actually are already state-of-the-art business practices. Thank you so much.